Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture what we are going to do is that we are actually going to go ahead and create the crawl page method, the crawl page function. But even before creating that function, what we do is that we go ahead and we actually type in the static method over here, defining that this method is actually a static one. So we type add static method, so that's going to remove the warning associated with this thing. And once we are done with this, we are pretty much good to go. So now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to go ahead and define this function or this method right here. So as this is the class, so we actually call it as method. So again, we type in static method and then define the crawl page over here. So what this method is going to do is that it's actually going to accept the thread name and the page URL. So the thread name is nothing but what you could say, it's actually one instance which is going to crawl some web page. So as I earlier mentioned, this is going to be a multi-threaded program. That is, we are going to have multiple programs executing simultaneously in parallel to each other so as to speed up the execution. So you actually need to pass in the thread name over here along with the page URL. So you simply type in thread underscore name along with the page URL which it is crawling. So once we have this URL, what we do is that we check if that particular URL is not actually crawled. So I guess I misspelled this. This should be CRAWL. So I just made a mistake over there. Okay, so once this thing is done, what we do is that we first check if the URL is not already crawled. So in order to check that, what we do is that we type if page URL not in spider.crawl. So what this does is that it basically checks if the URL is not already crawled. So if the URL is not already crawled, that means this is a new URL. Then what we do is that we actually need to display to the user that right now we are crawling a particular URL. So what we do is that we type print, then type in the thread name, because as this thread is crawling the URL, then we type a plus sign, and let's say this says this thread is let's say now crawling a particular URL, and that URL is nothing but the page URL. So each thread is going to actually crawl a particular page URL. So what we need to do here is that once it starts doing that, we actually need to display it to the user so that the user understands what's going on in the background. Now also what we are going to do is that we also need to display the queue elements and the actual contents of the queue which is being crawled. So we type print. So the first thing which we type is queue, then we give a plus sign, then type in the string, and this is going to be length over here. So string length. So in here we actually type in len, and to this we pass in the object as spider.queue. So this kind of gives you idea about the queue which is being crawled. So we type plus, and in quotations let's use a pipe over here. So in quotations let's use a pipe over here, and let's type in crawled, then again type in plus str to convert it into a string, pass in len, and that is going to be spider dot crawled. So this is going to give you kind of an idea of the number of files which are crawled at the moment. Okay, so once this thing is done, we are pretty much good to go, and let me just make sure that everything is correct, and I guess everything is right at the moment. Okay, so once this thing is done, the next thing which you need to do is that you actually need to add those links, that is nothing but the crawl links, to the queue. So in order to do that, what we need to do is that we need to write a bunch of code in a particular function. So let's name that function as add links to queue. So right now we don't have that particular function, but we are going to create that soon enough. So let's type in spider dot add links to queue. So that is basically going to add the particular links to the queue. So this is actually going to accept a few things. The first thing it is going to accept is that it's actually going to get the data from one more function, which is going to be the gather links function. So the gather links function is actually going to gather all the links, and then it's going to return it over here. So we type in spider dot gather links, And remember, even the gather links function is not created right now, and this gather links function is actually going to accept the page URL. So our next job is to basically create these two functions which we don't have right now, and what this is going to do is that gather links function is actually going to gather all the links from the web page, and the next function, which is add links to queue function, basically makes sure that the links are getting added to the queue. So once this thing is done, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to remove the page URL from the queue. So we type spider dot queue dot remove, and we need to remove the page URL because that is already visited, and we need to basically add it to the crawled set. So we type spider dot, this is going to be crawled, and then type in dot add, and to this pass in the page URL. So once this thing is done, the final thing which we need to do is that we also need to create the update files function as well, which is basically going to update all the files, because remember, these things are right now stored in the sets and they are not returned to the files. So finally what we need to do is that we need to make sure that the data from those sets is actually returned to the files, so that the permanent data is actually stored in the files. So we type spider dot update files, and remember that even this function is not created at the moment, and we will create the add links to queue function, the gather links function, and the update files function in the upcoming lecture. So that's it for this lecture, and the main significance of this lecture was that we have created this crawl page function which basically crawls up the web page, and it basically removes the page URL from the queue, it adds the page URL to the crawled set, and it finally updates all the files. So in the next lecture, let's go ahead and learn how to build these functions right here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.